Hello everybody, we're back at the bench again for another installment of the tune-up series on this 1959 Evinrude Fast Twin 18 horse. We're going to rebuild the carburetor this time, and so I've got the carburetor sitting here on the bench. Still has the fuel line attached, it still has the choke solenoid attached. Need to take that stuff off and then tear it apart, clean it out, and put a kit in it. So let's get started. We'll start by taking the old fuel line off. Clips are a lot of fun. The fuel line's old and brittle and it just cracked right off of there. As you can see, it just breaks apart. So we'll get the clip off of this thing. There. I usually use zip ties for hose clamps when I put them back together. I guess if I was real concerned about the hose clamps and everything being original, I can reuse these clamps, but sometimes I do if it's something real special. But typically I just use the zip ties. They work well. And I run my motor, so you know, it's not that big of a deal. I do have some of these if I want to make sure that everything is original, but I don't have a problem with the zip ties. So first thing we want to do is get this solenoid off of here. Of course, if it was not an electric start motor, we wouldn't have this step. Take the little wire retainer out. These don't always come out real easy. You gotta kind of break the end off. Pull the wire out. I'll just put a new piece of wire in there when I'm done. Pull that linkage out of there. Take this whole, once you got that off of there, you can take this whole piece off the side. And avoid having to take all the clips apart. I like to leave as much of the linkage intact as possible just to not make extra work for myself. Set these little screws aside for now. And then take the bowl screw that holds everything together out. Alright, there's the solenoid and the bracket. We'll set that over here. Keep all of our carburetor bowl screws together. Continue to remove those screws and take that bowl off of there. This one's still got a black gasket in it and it's pretty hard, so it hasn't been serviced in a long time, if at all. I'm sure this one will still have a cork float inside. Nothing wrong with the cork floats as long as you don't use ethanol fuel. Typically, as long as they're not all rotted out already. But on motors that I'm going to run regularly, I definitely want to replace the float with a modern plastic foam float. ethanol resistant. I don't run ethanol in my motors, but just in case I have to, I like to have them ethanol resistant wherever possible. So there's the inside of the carburetor bowl. It looks exceptionally clean, actually. Well, this one should clean up very easily. When they're really nasty, then a lot of times I'll soak them. I have been just using Berryman's Chem Dip, which, it's okay, I suppose. If you leave it in there a while, I find that I have to leave it in there much longer than the recommended time. It says never leave them in overnight. I find that I have to leave them in at least overnight to do any good. Sometimes for a couple days. There are better products out there than that, if you ask me, but most of them that aren't too bad, I just I'm able to just spray them out with aerosol cleaner, which is what we're going to do with this one. So it did have the cork float. The cork's still in good shape. The shellac is still all on it. If you run ethanol fuel and leave it in the bowl with one of these floats in it, with the dark shellac on it, it will just eat that stuff off of there. It'll all end up in the bottom of the bowl, and it'll plug up the fuel system and it'll stop running. If you drain the carb, then it seems to be okay. I haven't noticed any real problems with the fuel other than that, as long as it doesn't sit in there forever. We took the needle out, we take the seat out, replace it with the new one that comes in the kit. This one's probably okay, but it doesn't have the little spring that connects to the float arm to pull it down. I like that a lot better because these have a lot more of a tendency to stick. Take the nozzle out. I'm sure this is nice and clean because everything else is. Looks pretty good. Got a little crud along the top here, but not bad. We'll clean it up. Going to replace the packing on this one. The packing washers go in here where the needles go to keep the thing from leaking air. And I've got this pick. I prefer this tool to get them out. That's the best method I've found so far. So I kind of just have to get in there. Be careful not to mess up the threads. But you kind of just got to dig that old packing out of there. Which can be a lot of fun. Depending on how bad it is. This one's coming out pretty well. We got one of them out. These motors have 2. The larger ones have 3. The kits come with enough to do 3, and the new kits come with a plastic washer, which goes on top to prevent the fiber washer from squeezing up inside the packing nut too much. And that's what tends to happen to these after so long. You have to tighten it up again, and it eventually squeezes up inside, and it starts to break off. And that plastic washer definitely helps that. And it's coming. Some more of it. It's very difficult to get all of this out most of the time, but you get most of it out. And then some carb cleaner, you get some more of it out. You gotta make sure you don't get any of it all the way down in there and block that off. But if you do, you can usually blow it out with compressed air. across the top, and it'll usually draw it up out of there. There's most of the rest of it. Alright, good enough for now. We'll get the rest with some carb cleaner and then try to get the rest of it out. Same thing in the bowl. We got another one down here. I'll save you the experience of watching me dig that one out too. I'll get that done and then we'll come back to do some cleaning. Okay, I've got the packing out of the bowl and the packing out of the body. I'd taken the needles out when I took the carburetor off. The needles are actually pretty clean. I'll probably give them a little spray down, but those look good. Set those aside. And I'm going to grab my carb cleaner. And we're going to step outside and spray this thing out. Okay, we're outside here. I'm going to spray out the carburetor. Start with the bowl. And we'll spray that out, clean up the nozzle, and then we'll do the carb body. This carburetor cleaner can is almost empty, so I don't know how long it'll last, but let's see what happens here. Try to spray out all the little debris left over from the packing. Spray through there. Here's where the fuel comes in. Clean that out good. Clean off the outside. And that's all for that can. Clean off the nozzle. Fresh can of carb cleaner. Definitely recommend you wear gloves with this. Stuff will really dry your skin out. It's definitely not good for you. You don't want to overexpose yourself to it. Once you're done, it kind of softens the gloves up, so you'll probably just take them off and throw them away and get a fresh pair. Okay, now we got the carburetor body. Try to get as much of that old packing out of there. Looks like that's pretty clean. Spray some down the throat. I don't know if you can see it, but this stuff that's running out of there is kind of brown. It's taking the old oil residue and stuff out of there. That's for the idle circuit. And then inside here, those little holes in the top is where the fuel meters for the idle. So that's the low speed circuit. If you plug this and spray through this hole, it forces fluid up through those little holes and cleans that out underneath here. Now the carb kit comes with a new Welch plug. You can pull this out, clean it out from the top. I find that I rarely ever have enough stuff underneath here to bother with that, but it's in there. I always run them, and if I have problems with them after I've done the carb service, then I'll pull that out, check it out, clean it, and replace it. Otherwise, I don't mess with it. Some people just do them every time, but I don't. Air vent here. That's clean. Clean the outside surface of the carburetor off. And we are just about done and ready to rebuild it. Okay, we'll head back to the shop and get on with the rebuild. Okay, we're back in the shop and we're going to rebuild this carburetor. Here I have my OMC System Match Carb Kit. Got all the parts in it. It's part number 777721. And I'm going to open up the bag and we're going to get after this carburetor. There's a new float valve. Comes with the gasket, the float valve itself, the needle, and the little spring clip that holds it to the float. New float. Welch plugs, all the packing washers, gaskets, and stuff. This carb kit services a whole multitude of carburetors. So there are a few pieces in here that we won't use on this one. But we will use the packing washers and the plastic washers and the new pivot pin and so forth. And then we have the new bowl gasket. The Boss gasket is in here. And the new gaskets for the flange, which we'll hold on to, and we'll use the correct one when we put the carburetor back on. But until then, we'll just hold on to these. Okay, so let's start by putting the nozzle back in the carb body. Just snug it up so it doesn't come loose. You don't want it rattling loose in the carburetor while the engine's running, but you don't want to over torque it and mess it up either. Open up our bag of washers and gaskets and such. We'll get the Boss gasket out of there, which is this little donut looking piece here. That goes over the nozzle. That seals between this Boss and the bowl and the top of the carb body where the nozzle goes. That way you're metering the fuel through the high-speed circuit. Some of your larger motors, like the old RDs 25 horse, they actually had the carbs were put together without these. You can put them in there, but they were assembled originally without them. They use enough fuel that what gets by there is not too much to make it too rich, and then you can still adjust it with the high-speed needle. These motors, the smaller ones, you'll get too much fuel by there. You can close the high speed on most of them, and it's still too rich. So that is a necessary part. Let's get the packing washers out. Little fiber washers and the plastic one. This will take 2 fibers and the plastic one in both the body and the bowl. So we'll take the 2 fiber washers and set them in, bottom them out so they're nice and flat. Take the plastic one, lay it on top, go back and get our packing nut, start it in there, and just hold it so it doesn't come apart. I like to have everything put together, and then I'll put the needles in, snug those up, and that way I'm not bending anything while I'm putting things back together. Next thing to do is the float valve. And that little spring is easy to lose. It's trying to get away from me already. First thing, put that little spring in this groove. Clip it on there so it doesn't get away. Then we take the valve seat, put the washer on it, and thread it in. It takes a kind of a wide screwdriver with a sort of a narrow blade. This is just an old junky one that I ground to fit, and it works good. Torque that down. Take the float. The float goes in this way with these cutouts toward the carb body. Clip the needle on there. Set the needle in the valve seat and just drop it down. We'll get the new pivot shaft out of here. And we start it in the carb body, run it through the float, push it into the other side of the carb body. There we go. Now, we want to, that's sitting up too high. This needs to be level across there, across this. The bottom of the float should be level with the top of this surface. A lot of times on these, you just have to push them down and pretty much on. Looks good. Next thing, we'll put the bowl gasket on. Line up all the holes. Make sure the boss gasket is in place. And then we'll set the bowl over the body. And we'll start our screws. Now on this one we got to remember, because of the electric start, the solenoid goes in this one, so we got to save the long screw for that hole. The other ones are all the same length and they're shorter than the long one. Before we attach that, let's get our other packing washers out. Just empty everything here and I'll put the other stuff back when I'm done. 2 packing washers and the plastic one. Set that first packing washer in. Oops. That's nice and flat. Second one. That's nice and flat. And then that plastic one on top. We get our other packing washer, or nut, sorry. And snug that one up. Take our solenoid bracket, line these holes up, put this screw through here and into the carb. Just snug, not tight yet. Okay, get both of them in there before we torque them down. Tighten them up good and tight. take that strap, put that across there, and put the screws back in there. Get that back tightened up again, and we'll put the linkage back in there. And I don't have any wire here handy, but take a small piece of fine wire, stainless if you've got it. I don't have it. I tend to use MIG welding wire. It seems to work well. If you're in a saltwater environment, of course, that's going to rust and it's not going to last. But I haven't had any problem with it in fresh water, and it seems to work good. What's in there now I don't think is stainless. I think it's just some type of black oxided steel wire, mild steel wire. But at any rate, I will wire that back up. I'm going to not put the needles in yet. You can if you want, but you'll have to take them back out to put the carburetor back on the motor. So I'm just going to leave them as they are. Packing nuts are holding all the new packing in, and when we get to put this thing back together, then we'll put the needles back in. So for now, I guess we still need to tighten up the screws on the bowl. We don't want to leave those loose. I've done that before, and it leaks fuel all over. Then you got to take the thing back off. No fun. So we'll tighten the screws up. You want them pretty snug. You don't want to pull the threads out of them, but you want them in there pretty tight. You got to collapse that boss gasket so it seals. Okay, there we go. Carburetor is rebuilt and ready to be remounted. Till next time, thanks for watching.